Okay, David Hellard, welcome back to Mustical TV. This is obviously quite unusual surroundings. I've brought you into the Mustical dungeon. What do you think about it?
Well, I had such happy memories the last time I was here. I just hope we've got enough lube.
We seem to be doing interview swapping. I've interviewed you a couple times for Mustical TV, and now you've interviewed me on Bad Boy podcast. Now I'm interviewing again. Does this mean that I'll get another run on Bad Boy?
Well, I think the trouble is, you probably owe me payback from Bad Boy running. So, yeah, of course, we'd love to have you back. And the good thing is we've got all the proper questions out of the way now. So it just means when you come back, it's going to be really filthy and completely arbitrary questions just for the sake of fun. Yeah. So it'll probably be a really good interview.
Good. Unlike this one, because it's going to be run by me, which means it's going to be boring. Sorry, listeners.
Never.
Right, so the topic of this interview is long distance running. It's something that I am really interested in, obviously, because I am going to be preparing for Marathon Des Sables, and I'm obviously going to be doing some longer runs over the course of this year. Not that I haven't done longer runs before, but I feel like I've been into them relatively unprepared, and I've ended up hurting myself possibly because I've basically gone into them as an obstacle racer, not as a long distance runner.
Yeah.
Whereas I think you come from a long distance running background and you're very used to preparing for long distance runs, and I think it's pretty obvious that you do things differently. So if you were me and you were going, say, ignoring the fact that I've hurt myself over long distance runs before, but what would be the first things that you start thinking about if you were going in for a marathon?
Well, I think not even just marathons. I think a lot of OCR runners are, if you do things like British Fitness, it's very good for the stop and start. Or if you interval sessions, like not interval sessions, if you do reps down the gym, but actually the building blocks of running are really built on three types of runs. You've got interval sessions or hill reps where you really build up your top speed, build up your strength. You've got your tempo run, which is where you're running as close to that threshold pace, the feeling where you're like, oh, this is really going some, and you build up that distance, and then you've got your long run. And so if you're doing a 5k, you're training for that, a 10k, a marathon, half marathon, doesn't matter what it is, those are the three blocks. And so you want to make sure there's at least a day in between all of those. The first one is your interval session, hill session. They're essentially the same thing. Running up a hill you'll go slower, but it's the same intensity as if you're sprinting on a track doing a lap. And what you really want to be doing is sectioning off a distance that you repeat and repeat and repeat in the same intensity. So when you start, if you're doing shorter races, you want to have those about 400 meters, 600 meters, 800 meters, and you give yourself about a minute's rest in between. Less for 400s, you could do 35 seconds, 50 seconds. And when you first start, your first one should feel quite comfortable. And you want to do it so that the end of, let's say, 3 to 5k, if you're doing the shorter distances, maybe 6k of total effort, your last one you're doing as close to flat out as you can, but it's a similar time to the first. So it gets harder and harder and harder, but your time should stay the same. So you can do those on hills, you can do those on track, you can just mark it on a piece of grass. The longer the distance you're training for, the longer the interval. So I would do some 400 meter reps, but if I'm marathon training, I still mix in some 400 meter reps, but I do 16 of them. And that really builds up the lactic in your muscle. But primarily, we move to 1 mile reps, 1200 meter reps, or 2000 reps. And by the end of my training, coming up to something like a marathon, I'd be doing about 10 kilometers worth of that in a session. The beauty of that session is it gets you faster, and for things like OCR, it's fantastic because you're training your body to not only run extremely quickly, but then you have the minute recovery and you're out again. So compared to an obstacle race, it's replicating what you're doing. You hit the obstacle, your legs get a rest sometimes, then bang, you're out again. Number 2 is a threshold session. The idea of this is you're running at the pace at which you're going to be racing at, and your body is in a balance of the lactic acid building up, and you get more and more tired, but you've got to try and maintain that pace. What's beautiful about this is it's actually replicating what it feels like to be at the end of a race. your 3 races, so your 3 building block runs should be at least a day apart, and your threshold run, or your tempo run as it's known also, should be at the end of your week. So if you have Friday off, it's the Thursday, and that means you're always running on tired legs. So when you come to the end of your long race, you're used to banging out the pace at which you should be running in your training on tired legs as well. So actually your body's used to having to deal with all that lactic acid and having to deal with the mental challenge of still pushing. Typically you'd start with shorter runs that would be half marathon pace, for example. You might do 2 miles with a jog mile either side to warm up and warm down. 2, 3, 4. You'd only really want to get up to a maximum of 5 miles at half marathon pace, and that's going to be really hard at the end of a long training week. You'd then switch it in a marathon plan where you'd then carry on extending the miles to 6, 7, 8, up to about 12 miles sometimes on a Thursday, marathon pace throughout, and that is incredibly hard but incredibly good for you. So building that into shorter races, you'd want to be doing 5Ks, 6Ks, 7Ks. Half marathon, you'd still be doing quite long mileage at that, but you probably wouldn't get more than 8 miles at marathon pace, or doing 4 or 5 miles at half marathon pace. The third run you want to do is your long run. The long run is about time on your feet. It's getting your body used to constantly moving, and how it deals with running out of energy. After an hour, you're going to have an impact of having not enough glycogen in your muscles. It's good to practice with your gels, and it's good to just practice trying to stay mentally focused, and also your running technique for when your body starts to get tired, your core muscles go, and making sure you're still running strong. Start that at about, if you're training for a marathon, in a training plan for someone who's run a fair bit, you'd probably start at about 12 miles. For anyone else, it can really be anything, and if you really can't run very much, you just do 2 minutes running, 1 minute not, 3 minutes running, 1 minute not, 4 minutes running, 1 minute not, 5 minutes running, 1 minute not, and you just build it up. You want to build up to about 22 miles about 5-6 weeks before a marathon, and you do a couple of 22-mile runs, a couple of 20-mile runs. The pace to do that is never at marathon pace, because if you do, you'll get too tired, potentially get injured, but it also means then when you come and do your other sessions, you're too tired to perform as well. So you want to take your marathon pace, or what you aim it to be, add on at least 45 seconds, and you can add on a minute and a half, up to a minute and a half really, per mile onto that, and that gives you what should be a quite comfortable pace to run at and still talk. You can do it in groups even better. You can practice eating on that, your gels, your shot blocks, and that then is the building block of any training plan. Marathons then just add more.
So straight up, what would be a good plan, day-to-day plan to have your marathon training?
I'll give you a couple of structures, because it really depends on if you're just running to get round, if you're running with cross training, if you're running also doing OCR, or if you're just going for PB flat out marathoning. If you're just going PB flat out marathoning, Monday, the start of the week would be just a 5-mile jog, recovery jog, just work the muscles. If you want to add weights into your training as well, that's a good day to do the weights on. Do legs, upper body. You can do a bit of a CrossFit session. Tuesday, I do the hills or the track. Wednesday would be the longer run that's quite slow. You could also do weights then, or a BMF class, something to add strength. Thursday is your tempo run, where you're building up how long you can run at your race pace. Friday, take the day off, and really take the day off. Don't do anything. You can walk about a bit, but I wouldn't cross train there. You really want to give your body the chance to recover. Saturday, you can do a fitness class, you can do a park run, something that is a little bit punchy. You could even race as well. I'd recommend doing any races up to 10-12 miles, unless you're then doing really long days on the Sunday, and Sunday's your long run. If you're not going for as an aggressive a plan, or you're not wanting to do quite as much mileage, you can drop some of those days. So Saturday can be less intense, just a jog. You can lose Monday completely instead of having a recovery run. Don't do that. And on the most minimalist plans, if you're just looking for a 4-day week, you can drop the Wednesday as well, the longer run, and switch in other sports if you want to.
How about stepping further beyond that, moving on to the ultra distances, and obviously with your plans to do MDS, how does that training plan then develop onto crazy bigger distances?
So the strange thing about ultras is there's quite a few different trains of thought. Marathon plans are fairly established. There's some slight varieties, but the structure I've mentioned before tends to be in most of them. Ultra marathons, though, even the MDS this year, the female winner Elizabeth Barnes, who won last year, she won based off, I think, around 60 miles a week average. That's what I'd be doing if I was marathon training. Whereas Danny Coyle, who was the highest ever Brit, he runs up to 120 miles a week. So the difference between those two is insane. And actually, a marathon is harder in many ways than an ultra marathon, because as soon the beauty of the marathon is that it takes you slightly beyond what your body can fuel, and racing as fast as you do for that distance is really, really damaging on your body in terms of how exhausting it is mentally and physically. And backing off that speed a little bit to do the ultra actually means you can take on more fuel. You don't get that glycogen depletion in the same way, and so in some ways ultras are easier. And so training for it, you could just do a marathon plan and run it, and you'd be fine. If you really want to run it well, you probably should add miles. I've found the best way is by doing double days. When your body runs, every time it recovers, it improves slightly. And so if you're doing a huge amount of miles every day in one go, that stresses the body a huge amount, it's very hard to recover for the next day. So instead of doing 12 miles each day, if you did 5 miles in the morning, your body would have time to recover, you'd refuel, and when you then do the 7 miles that night, actually you feel fresh. It's a lot easier to do, not only physically but mentally. And so training for an ultra then just builds on the miles of a marathon. I follow the same marathon training plan I always have for the Marathon Des Sables. It's just that I'm now running to work 5 miles with a backpack, sometimes running back, and then doing the usual session. My Saturdays, I make sure that if I'm racing, I then do maybe 10 miles in the evening, and then still have the long run. And so because I'm doing such high mileage Saturday and Sunday in a short period, it replicates what it's like to do the combined total of that in one race.
Do you keep that same level of intensity going right up to the event itself, or do you taper?
So tapering is hard, and the longer the distance, then, or the more intense the distance, should we say, the more intense the exercise, the longer you really need to taper. For something like a 5k, you can potentially do a normal training week and still run a very good 5k on the Saturday. You might want to back off a little bit. As you build up, you get to something like a marathon where you actually taper for between 2 and 3 weeks. So 3 weeks out you'd have an 18-mile run, so you'd have your long run, 2 weeks out you'd drop that to 18, then the week before you'd probably do around 12 miles, with the last 4 miles at marathon pace to make sure you've still got that bit of zip in there. And that last week you are really cutting back quite significantly. You might only run 2-3 miles on the Monday. You do a session on the Tuesday, an interval session, but instead of having those longer 1 mile, 1200s, 2000 intervals that really tire you out, you do maybe 5Ks, probably less than that, of 200 meter sprints and then jog, and then 3-4 miles the next day, 3-4 miles the next day, and then maybe a mile or 2 the day before, with a few strides, which is just faster running, just to keep your mobility going. So it really is quite a drop off from your intensity. Half marathon you don't need to do quite the same. You can just reduce down the number of miles you're doing on the Thursday, your tempo run, to maybe 1 or 2 fast miles, and then once you've done a race, you reverse it. So if you've done a marathon, it's going to take you probably about 3 weeks, maybe longer. It's typically a mile per day, a day per mile. So if you've run 26 miles, it could take you up to 26 days to be fully recovered. You can still train, but you won't race as strong until that 3-4 weeks later. So you'd reverse your taper, and it's only the next weekend that you're starting to run some considerable distances, which is why the marathon's such a challenge, because you only really get one shot at it. If you blow up in a marathon and don't get your time, it's going to take you at least a month to be able to give it another chance. So that's the beauty of it, but it's also one of the drawbacks. You can do half marathons every 2 weeks. You can do 10Ks pretty much every week and go for a PB. So it makes it more challenging and harder to perfect, but ultimately more rewarding.
Yeah, cool. And we're talking about some pretty intense training here, and it's the sort of thing which it looks like, well, in running, the niggles are fairly commonplace. How do you deal with smaller injuries with such a regular training plan?
Injuries are really hard, and if you look at running clubs, the percentage of people who are injured is quite high. It's probably not quite as high as OCR, just because of the nature of jumping on and off obstacles, but a lot of it is about knowing your body, how it feels, and there are some injuries that you can manage and some injuries where you need to rest. So my general rule of thumb is, if it's a sharp pain, that's a problem. If it's just dull ache, that often is tiredness, and you can start slowly and warm up and see how it goes. If you do have problems then, and you're starting to feel a pain build up, you need to get it sorted quickly. The way the muscles work are, if something's injured and you carry on running, your other muscles then compensate, because you're still trying to put the same amount of exertion through that injured muscle, and in the same way, if you're, say you're standing on glass, you don't put as much force on one area, and say you'll then put more force on another, and so your injury starts to spread. Talk to Ross from our team if you want to know about that. So see a physio, they'll give you an assessment. Sometimes it's your body is not quite aligned, sometimes, and the most common is probably that your glutes are underdeveloped or not performing, and they can give you some exercises that allow you to build up and strengthen while you're still training. The good news is, if you see something at someone early about it, you can often carry on training while you're building up the strength, managing that injury, and it won't impact you. But if you wait too long, that's when you get a proper injury where you need to rest, and you'll have to have quite a few days, sometimes weeks laying off.
So with this level of training, surely nutrition is going to differ. How do you approach that?
I think the big difference between the way OCR racers race and runners race is that we just take on a lot more fuel as we're going around. So test it out on your long runs, but don't have it every long run. It's quite good to get your body used to running without that much energy, so that it becomes more efficient at using the fat. The main thing is, also energy wise, as soon as you've finished any of those 3 hard runs, your tempo, your interval and your long run, to get some carbs and some protein in you. Ideally 3:1, 4:1 ratio. Things like chocolate milk are really good for that, or peanut butter on a bagel, or actually even sushi. So just have a quick look, and you want to hit a 20-minute window when your muscles are still taking on glycogen at an intense level because they've been exercising, and so getting quick nutrition in then really helps you restore those to allow you to train in the future.
So in obstacle racing, a lot of us are quite into minimal shoes, but when I think of long distance in minimal shoes, it kind of think of bones crunching a little bit and all being quite high impact. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, you're completely right. I think in obstacle racing, the trend that has probably been pushed quite hard by Innovate has been to have minimalist shoes with no real padding on the base of the foot, the sole of the foot, and to have zero drop. And you can get away with it in obstacle racing, partly because it's shorter distances, but also because you're in squelchy mud. The impact going through your body isn't that bad, and the mileage you're running isn't huge. As soon as you're marathon training, the likelihood is you're going to be doing a lot of road running, and so if you don't have a 4-foot running style, you can cause quite a lot of injury by not having good padding there. So do go and see someone like Runners Need, where they give free assessments, or something like Six Physio, where they give full running assessments. And depending on how you pronate, you might need some support there. The ideal is if you're a 4-foot runner, you hopefully won't need any, but a lot of people then think, well, I'll become a 4-foot runner, and actually, unless you know what you're doing and you spend months and months doing that, because your muscles have been spent their whole life working the way they do, running the way they do, by changing your running action actually means you're then loading muscles that are underdeveloped with a huge amount of stress. So get a good pair of trainers and get some advice on it, because when you're building the muscles up, it will impact on your joints, it will impact on things like runner's knee, and you really need to get some support a lot more than you would in trail running, and especially OCR.
And what about good marathons to give a try as a first time marathon runner?
Well, I think the temptation is to always do London, because everyone knows it, everyone goes to it, it's such a big event. But actually I think you shouldn't do London as your first marathon. It's just too good. Nothing compares to it, I think, probably in the world. And also it's incredibly hard to run a good time there because it's so busy. I'd suggest just going for a smaller marathon, one local to home, or one which you can just enjoy. Some of the trail marathons are fantastic, things like the Beachy Head Marathon, the Eliminator Marathon. I don't know if it's still on, unfortunately, but those
it's now a Judgment Day trail run, rather than being called the Eliminator Marathon. It's been scooped under the Judgment Day banner.
Oh,
so it still exists, but yeah.
And the great thing about races like that is so much about running. Unlike OCR, people get focused on times, and you're running PBs, and once you become a slave to a PB, the only way you're satisfied is if you break your time. And if you do these trail runs, not only are they more beautiful, but you can't really PB because the conditions are so different in each one, and even day to day, that it's more about the joy of running, and it's more about seeing how you feel. And yeah, you can still set really good times, but it becomes more about the fulfillment of finishing. Whereas if you start with something like London, you're never going to have anything that compares to the atmosphere, and you're more likely to be pushed into that PB route, which I was fairly early, and I've learned to escape from, because I'm quite happy with my PB. But I'd suggest going for one that's a bit smaller, a bit friendlier, and then you can save that for a time that's really special, because I think not enough people appreciate how well it's organised, and the atmosphere, and just how amazing a race it is. And you know, if you sleep with Naomi Campbell on your first date, you're going to have shit sex for the rest of your life.
And lastly, how are you feeling about MDS, Dave?
I'm ignorance is bliss. I still don't see I can't fathom what the MDS is going to be like. I've run so many miles and it seems fine. I've read a lot of things, they seem fine. In fact, everything seems fine. But I know as soon as I'm out there, it's going to feel awful, and it's going to be completely different to everything I expected. So at the moment, I just can't visualise it. I've got no idea what it's going to be like, and I almost don't want to research, because I'm quite happy in this ignorance and this blissful ignorance. I think I should be good. The way it's structured is 3 semi-hard runs, kind of 22, 23, 24, 25, 26 miles, 3 days in a row. I think they should be fine. I'm mentally seeing those as tradie runs. And then you've got the double day, which is the 52, 55, 56. They still haven't announced it, miler. And that is obviously going to be further than I've ever run in one go, and more brutal. And the runs I've done that are long so far, I've really struggled mentally with. I've just been bored and unfocused. I'm hoping, because it's the actual race, I won't have that, but if I'm in the desert by myself for 9 hours with no one to talk to, just following a line in the sand, I could go mad. I mean, you know how much I like to chat. Madder. But I mean, the good thing is, because I'm raising money, it gives me that. And actually, part of the reason I've been telling everyone I want to try and be first Brit because I need that pressure to get me out of bed and to keep me training. And so when I'm out there, I'm going to know that I've got all these people watching, I've got this charity who I don't want to let down, and I've built this expectation that I feel I have to deliver on now. So I'm hoping all that pressure will keep me moving, but I think that the trouble is, because I want to do so well, it's so many different aspects that could go wrong. My worry is that I'm gonna just do too much and collapse or break down, so I'm gonna have to be really careful not to push myself too hard, because I've no experience of it, and yeah, it's not the place to find out, but I'm gonna have to.
So that's the intimidation of doing well. What about the intimidation of buying a venom pump?
Yeah, I'm not even sure what to do with it. That's the thing, they give you this venom pump, there are no instructions, or not the one I've got, so I'm going to have a venom pump out there, and then if I get bit, it's just too many unknowns to think about, and it's partly why I want to do it. The great thing is, if I have a horrific time, I know you've got to do it next.
Yeah, cheers, man.
And that's gonna keep me warm at night.
Good. Okay, David Hellard, thank you very much for joining us back on Mud School TV. We're really looking forward to hearing about how you get out on the Sahara Desert for MDS. In the meantime, I'll keep on waiting for that second invite at Bad Boy Running. See ya!
Cheers, guys. If you've got any questions, if I haven't covered anything, then you can always message us on the BMF British Military Fitness Race Team page. Always happy to help with any training plans, answers, so yeah, be in touch.